Before I start chapter 5, last time they said they're going to kill the dog Max. So think about it while we're reading chapter 5. Why is Max so angry? Why is the dog angry? Here's chapter 5. Justin barely had time to put on his shoes before hopping into the back of his dad's SUV. He clicked in his seatbelt just as his dad threw the car into reverse, and they screeched out the driveway. His mom pulled directions up on her phone to the military kennel. He bit his handler, his mom explained. Bad, and a couple other guys, too. Look, we'll go see him, his dad said, his hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. But I'm not making any promises. I told Sergeant Reyes we'd take him in, his mom went on, ignoring his dad. But he said Max was just too dangerous. I told him we were coming, and he said he'd see what he can do. But unless he can be convinced otherwise, they're putting him down tonight. Unless I can be convinced otherwise, I'm not putting my family at risk, Justin's dad said firmly. His mom sat back in her seat and stared out the window. We can't let it happen, she said to her reflection. The second Justin opened his car door, he heard the deafening sound of barking dogs. So many dogs, so much barking. As Sergeant Reyes shook hands with his parents and gave Justin a nod, Justin took in the large, nondescript building in front of him. Justin was surprised that the world-famous military dog training facility, Maitland, was so normal-looking. Dogs can have post-traumatic stress disorder just like people can, Reyes explained as they followed him around the side of the building. When Max lost his trainer, when he lost Kyle, he lost his anchor. The group stopped on the edge of the dirt training area, surrounded by a chain-link fence. Justin watched a dog run at top speed toward a trainer wearing a puffy full bodysuit. The man wore extra pads on his arms and legs, and he bent his knees a little, preparing for the dog to attack him. Justin knew it was just practice, but he'd never seen a dog with such power and control in his body. It was actually pretty impressive. Max bonded so closely with Kyle, Reyes said as they watched the exercise. They ate, slept, fought together. It's proven hard to get him to follow orders from anyone else. Justin heard his mom suck in her breath as the dog launched himself at the trainer. The dog flashed his teeth and gums just before his mighty jaw clamped down on the man's padded arm. Justin swallowed hard. The dog began wrenching his head around violently, pulling the trainer with him. Reyes nodded toward the scene they were witnessing. That's 900 pounds of pressure coming down on that arm. Justin's dad let out a quiet whistle. He and Reyes exchanged a knowing glance. That's why we're reluctant to adopt out a problem dog, Reyes said. Someone could get hurt or worse. Let's see Max, Justin's mom said. It was the voice she used when she didn't want anyone to argue with her. Justin walked behind Reyes as they stepped into the main building of Maitland. The barking was so loud once they got inside. He could barely hear himself think as his eardrums vibrated with the sharp yelps of dozens of dogs. Justin took in the massive space. It was brightly lit and spotlessly clean. The walls were lined with tall, chain-linked metal cages, each one big enough for a grown man, and each one containing a dog like Max. The dogs moved freely within them. Some lay down resting, and some were hyper, jumping up and down, wagging their tails at the sight of Justin and his family. Justin's stomach churned. He didn't know why he was so nervous to see Max, and he wasn't even sure Max would remember him. Reyes led Justin and his parents down the long row of cages. The dogs followed them with their eyes as they passed. After what felt like an eternity, they finally stopped in front of Max's cage. Reyes made them stand back at a safe distance, about 5 feet away. Justin's heart nearly broke in two at the sight of Max. While the other dogs were happy or relaxed, Max was neither. He wasn't barking or wagging his tail. He wasn't even watching them. Nope. Max lay curled up with his head on his paws. His eyes were partly open, but he wasn't looking at anything. He looked so sad and alone, like he had nothing to live for. One ear flicked in Justin's direction, but otherwise Max showed no sign of recognition or excitement. He can't handle sharp noises anymore, Ray said with a sigh. Gunshots and explosions send him into a panic. Justin studied Max's half-closed eyes and the way his body sighed with each breath. Justin had never imagined that it was possible to describe a dog this way, but Max looked like he'd just given up. These dogs are bred to work, Rays went on. Take that purpose away from them and they're lost. They're lost. Max can't serve anymore, and if he can't serve, he's a danger to people wherever he is. Justin's mom let out a stifled cry, and her eyes filled with tears. She shook her head as she looked at Max. When she spoke, Justin recognized the resolve in her voice. It was almost as if, because she hadn't been able to save Kyle, she was determined to help Max. This family looks out for its own, she said. Ray studied her for a long moment before nodding. Though no one had explained it to him, he seemed to understand that Max was the closest thing Justin's family had to Kyle. Ray stepped closer to Max's cage. "How we doing, Max?" he said, his voice soft. With lightning speed, Max jumped up and snarled at Ray, baring his teeth. The dog moved so fast that Justin and his parents had to leap back in surprise. Max was no longer a forlorn, listless animal they had seen just seconds before. Now he was a wild beast. He scratched at the cage with his giant paws and growled at Sergeant Max as if he wanted to eat him whole. Max's eyes were filled with rage. "It's okay, boy," Ray said in a calming tone. "Sit, Max. Take it easy." Max barked menacingly. Rays turned to Justin's parents and shook his head as if to say there was nothing he could do to stop Max from meeting his fate, being put down. His dad put a hand on his mom's arm. "Pam, honey," he began. Justin saw the pain in his mother's eyes and the worry on his father's face. Before he knew what he was doing, Justin took a deep breath and stepped toward the cage. "Justin!" his dad and the sergeant said at the same time. Justin ignored them. "Hey, Max," Justin said. "You remember me?" He inched another tiny step forward. Max barked again, but he sounded less angry and afraid. He sniffed at the air and seemed to recognize Justin's scent. His growl trailed off. "You sure you want to do this?" Rays asked Justin. Justin wasn't sure, but he nodded. He had no idea what to do with a dog, but he couldn't bear seeing his mom so sad. If there was anything he could do to make her feel better, then he was going to do it, even if it meant losing a hand to an angry dog. Rays reached into his pocket and held something out to Justin. It was a rubber dog toy like the one he'd found in Kyle's footlocker. "It's called a Kong," Rays said. "We use them in training. It's a reward." "So I should give it to him?" Justin asked. "If he earns it." Justin nodded, his palms sweaty at the rubber toy. "Slow and steady," Rays said as Justin shuffled toward Max and held out the Kong. "No sudden moves." Max let out a low growl and kept his eyes on the toy. Justin's parents watched anxiously. Justin exhaled and studied Max for any signs that he was going to go bonkers. "Check it out, Max," Justin said evenly. "Cool toy, right?" Still standing, Max pressed his nose against the cage and sniffed at the toy. He tilted his head to one side inquisitively, his ears rotating forward as if he was trying to ask a question. "How do I get him to sit?" Justin called over his shoulder. "I think right now you'd better concentrate on giving him that Kong and keeping your hand attached to your wrist," Rays said. Justin kept his gaze locked on the dog. "Very funny. Seriously, what's the hand signal?" Justin turned his head ever so slightly toward Rays and watched him as he demonstrated the command. Justin looked back at Max and took a deep breath. He made an uptight fist with his free hand and held it against his chest. "Sit," he said as firmly as he could, all while trying to hide his utter terror that Max was going to bust through the bars and attack him. Max flinched at the sound of Justin's voice, but he stayed standing. Justin repeated the hand gesture. "Sit," he commanded. Max sat, his eyes glued to the Kong. Justin's mom gasped. His dad exhaled. Rays let out a surprised, "Huh." Justin couldn't believe that it worked. "Here you go, psycho hound," Justin said as he slowly nudged the Kong through the bars of the cage. Justin could see Max tensing up as the toy got closer to his snout. All of a sudden, Max lunged forward. Justin braced himself for the horrible sensation of Max's jaws tearing into his flesh, but nothing happened. Max wrapped his mouth around the Kong and gently tugged it from Justin's grip. Justin couldn't help but smile. Without thinking, he reached the tips of his fingers through the cage to pet Max's head. He could feel Max's warm breath on his hand, but before he made contact, a protective growl rumbled from the dog's throat. Justin gave an anxious smile and snatched his hand away from the cage. Max backed up and lay down, the Kong tucked between his two front paws. He got to work chewing as hard as he could, his ears perked up and happy. "Right, sorry," Justin said. "You enjoy that Kong. I'll be over here." Ray's put a firm hand on Justin's shoulder. "That was impressive, son," he said. The look on his face was a combination of awe and respect. Justin looked at his parents, not sure what would happen next. "Well," his dad said, "I guess we'll take Max home." That's the end of chapter 5.